Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. And today's presentation will be about unlocking new GenAI use cases with the power of Snowflake and specifically Snowpark. So we are going to spend roughly 30 minutes. And just before getting started, quick hello from my side. I am Felix. I'm the head of ML engineering at Tonic, and I will be speaking today much about GenAI and Snowflake. And the presentation is really structured into a quick intro to Datatonic, what we do, where we are based, and what kind of tech we are really excited about. And then I'm going to start with the key concepts of GenAI for a bit of level setting, making sure that we're all on the same page, before then really going into how Snowflake meets you when it comes to GenAI use cases. And then to bring all of this alive, I'm also going to show you a quick live demo on how you can actually create your first GenAI use case on Snowflake. And then we're going to close with a few key takeaways and closing thoughts. And when it comes to Q&A, please reach out to us after watching this video. So enjoy. So as a quick intro to Datatonic, I would like to say that we are the leading cloud data and AI consultancy. And what that means is that we have delivered many projects so far in the data and AI space, over 700 already. We have won multiple awards already together with our partners, and we have really happy customers. We are actually located globally, so we have a few offices here in Europe as well as in North America, where our headquarter is really located in the heart of London. But we also have other offices, for example, in Switzerland. This is where I'm over from. And yes, we also have a few more outside of that. What we're really doing at Datatonic is delivering business value to our customers. And just to name one outstanding here is that for Sky, we have worked on both, bringing in the strong data foundations and then enabling machine learning use cases. And on this slide, you will see that we are working closely together with a few selected partners. And outside of our good relationship with Google, where we have won multiple partner awards, we are also a key select partner with Snowflake. And this is where the focus really lies today. How can you create your GenAI use cases with the power of Snowflake? And you will also see that we have a few selected other partners and key tools we work with together. And just to name a few, we are establishing DBT foundations when it comes to creating data foundations. And we are also working with other partners such as Looker for visualizations and dashboarding solutions. And as such, we're really experts in building the modern data stack. And without going too much into detail, I just wanted to highlight that when it comes to all the data foundations here at the bottom of the slide, really make sure that all your data is transferred from a raw state to a really clean, governed state in a secure manner to then actually enable insights through, let's say, Looker dashboards, for example, and other kinds of activation mechanisms. And all of this is really grounded on orchestration mechanisms through dbt, Snowflake, and also other orchestration tools. With this in mind, we really want to enable insights, but also GenAI and ML use cases. And this is the top part here. And today's presentation is actually focusing just on GenAI use cases based on your modern data stack and building upon your strong data foundations. Why working with us on GenAI is really because of three reasons. The first reason is we are focusing on impactful use cases for our clients. And just to highlight a few, we have, for example, partnered with a Swiss luxury brand where we are bringing personalized responses to clients visiting their website, and this with the power of GenAI. Further, we have also created for a leading furniture retailer a way to interactively talk to their data. And you will see that today's demo is actually capturing a similar use case. And then one of the biggest stories we have just recently announced also Google Next was the partnership together with Hyber, where we're really using GenAI to create a personalized metaverse experience in a gaming universe, essentially. The second reason why we are working on GenAI use cases with our clients is really because of our strong MLOps footprint. We have, for example, worked with the likes of BT and Vodafone in the telco space, but also with digital natives such as Delivery Hero to bring MLOps to their stack. And with all those MLOps best practices in mind, we're actually taking the same to also enable LLMOps for GenAI use cases. And the third reason why working with us on GenAI makes sense is we are only committed to responsible use cases. We would never take on a project which might cause a harm to anyone, including customers and users of these GenAI use cases. And with that quick intro to data tonic in mind, I would love to talk about the key concepts of GenAI. When it comes to the journey of large language models, I just want to quickly highlight that it feels like a long time ago. In traditional programming, we started with batch programming, really using those punch cards, but lots of things has happened since then. And just to highlight, for example, in 2012 or so, the neural network wave really picked up because they were largely successful in several domains, including natural language processing, but also computer vision and other kinds of traditional ML tasks. However, beyond, for example, classifying whether an image is including a cat or a dog image, we can really go further with large language models. And an easy way to visualize how large language models actually look like, they are similar to neural networks, but they have been trained on a vast amount of data, which is available on the public internet. So they are really including a large corpus of unstructured text data, as well as other curated data sets, also scientific data sets, which now enable a new wave of use cases, which are more about generating new content. And this content can be, for example, generating text, generating marketing ideas, whatsoever. But it can actually also be around creating code or even creating new image. So with that in mind, you can actually now think about the way of how large language models work a bit differently to how compared to classical machine learning. Because in classical machine learning, you typically need two things. The first one is you need the code to build your model and then also label data, depending on the use case. And then most of the time, you, your team, and your data scientist would actually work with is the model build phase. Really making sure that your model is trained in the right way, that you have selected the correct model algorithm and type, and then, of course, evaluated on an held out test data set. And in this case, classic machine learning is really good at prediction, at classifying, clustering, and also giving recommendations. However, when it comes to GenAI, the method is a bit different. And when it comes to generative AI learning, there's actually a paradigm shift because here the model build phase is already abstracted away from you. The model, and sometimes we also call it the foundational model, is trained on such a large corpus of data that it excels at multitude of tasks actually, because those foundation models are good at generating content, but actually also if you give them the right context about your question, for example, they're really good at answering that specific question. And this without going back to the model build phase. And this makes those foundational models really, really successful. And there are different ways of how you can tweak those foundational models to your actual use case. I'm not going into the specific ways of how you can do that today, but just to mention a few, you can, for example, really tweak how a generative AI model works by using prompt engineering, which is an evolving field, and also through fine-tuning and other techniques. So with these new large language models, there's a new wave of use cases, as I said before. And if I were to just name a few, which are really compelling use cases, one is you can actually take a large language model and put it into a position of a data analyst. Imagine a model which acts as an analyst who's able to understand your data and also give you the responses based on your queries. And this is really compelling because in this way, you can improve the time to value to search, navigate, extract insights, and so on. With the upside that you don't need to understand the complexity of your data and maybe even without the knowledge of SQL or other kinds of querying languages. Outside of this use case, you can also use foundation models for customer service experiences. Another use case which comes to mind is in the customer service area. Imagine a use case where your chatbot on your website can answer questions from customers in a really personalized manner with the power of a GenAI model. Outside of that, you can also go into the creative area where you use foundational models to create new types of content. Think about the next few ideas for a marketing event, for example, ideas about what you want to write a book about, and so on. This is really where GenAI models can help you with. And outside of that, also for generally AI practitioners, you can really take those large language models and start to tweak them, given your use case and given your data. And for today, you will actually see that I'm going to show you a bit more on the side of the analyst role of a GenAI model. So by now establishing those key concepts of GenAI, let's talk about Snowflake and see how it meets actually our requirements when it comes to these kinds of use cases. For most of the GenAI use cases, you will see a set of repeating components which are required for most of the use cases we are currently thinking about in the GenAI space. First one is, and we typically try to work from the user to the components, is that users typically expect a user interface when it comes to interacting with your generative AI models. And as such, you will need to think about a user interface. But a user interface on its own can't, of course, do it all. So that's why by also splitting here the slide between left and right, you can see that on one side, this is more the front-end side of things, whereas on the back end, there's a multitude of services which power the whole GenAI use case. So as such, you will typically have a backend service, and this backend service holds all the business logic which you need to understand, for example, what was clicked on your user interface, how to interact with your large language model, and even more things. So as such, you have the backend service, but also the large language model in your use case, and all of this, of course, on top of your data. However, when getting started, you will notice that there are quite a few choices when it comes to implementing each of these components. Just to name a few choices for user interfaces, you will see an evolving stack of Python packages, which can be used to create user interfaces. And just to name a few, you could, for example, look into Streamlit or Gradio. However, if your team is already using other kinds of JavaScript frameworks, well, there are other sets of tools which you can use, just to name a few again, React.js and also Angular. And then lastly, when it comes to user interfaces, you could also think about creating a bespoke dashboard by, for example, using Looker, Click, Tableau, and other kinds of tools. While this is really an overwhelming set of choices which you have to solve, it really depends on the skill set which you already have in your team, but also how fast you want to move, essentially. And we're going to clear that up in a few slides. When it comes to the backend service, and stack which has really become a common pattern is based on Docker. With the help of Docker containers, you can really containerize all your backend logic into a single artifact. And within this one, we typically see Python and also Fast API as two key components to enabling a backend service to be able to communicate with your user interface, but also integrate other calls, for example, to your large language model. And lastly, as to the large language model itself, you typically can think about a choice between proprietary externally hosted LLMs or self-hosted open source LLMs, which both come with a list of pros and cons. You can, for example, look into an externally hosted large language model, such as the one provided by OpenAI. However, you will need to expose your proprietary data, of course. You need to talk to an external API and external LLM. So this is a downside of that approach. However, there are a few upsides with that approach. Just to name a few, you will have minimal infrastructure operations because that model is already managed for you and you only access it through an API. And you can also make sure that you're accessing the leading third-party providers for large language models. When it comes to the open source or self-hosted side of large language models, you will actually see that when you self-host a large language model, that you need to take care about the high infrastructure operations. And you also have to admit that you can only use the open source models which you're self-hosting in your solution. Depending on the choice you're making, and let's really see how Snowflake can meet us here, the infrastructure operations depend, of course, how complex they are given the tool you're choosing. And then lastly, the upside of self-hosted large language models is, of course, that you're bringing the model close to your data. You don't have to talk to an external API, which makes it, of course, really, really good at maintaining your privacy and your security requirements of your organization. So let's now finally look into how you can take such a typical GenAI use case into Snowflake. And if you remember, we're working backwards again from the user. Snowflake actually offers you a way to create a user interface for your users by implementing Streamlit applications. And I already hinted at that before, that there are different choices of how you can create your user interface. One of them is Streamlit, which is Python-based, which has a few pros. First one is, if your team is already capable of doing Python, they will feel that Streamlit is a really straightforward way of implementing your UI, and you don't actually have to be an expert in writing JavaScript code, HTML code, and everything else which is needed for creating web applications. But further, Streamlit can also enable you for rapid prototyping. With a few lines of code, you can create your first user interface, but also add additional Python logic into your user interface. Because for getting really easily started on Snowflake, you could actually create a Streamlit interface and then connect that to an externally hosted large language model, such as OpenAI. And this is really the preferred approach if you're going to create your first GenAI use case or your first GenAI proof of concept, because this is really easy to get started with. However, there are a few more choices which you can take on the Snowflake stack. Streamlit is already in public preview. You can start it with that today. When it comes to the back-end side of things, you can actually now make sure that you can use Snowpark container services, or in short, SPSC. And for this service, you can actually create containers in your Snowflake data warehouse without a need to host them anywhere else. You're built through your Snowflake account, and they run as part of your Snowflake account by making use of your data warehouse. And the upside here is that you can actually bring all your business logic into a container, as you can see here, but you can also host open source large language models as part of these containers, because the containers can be running on CPU, but also on GPU, which makes it really powerful, because now you can bring your business logic as well as your model to your Snowflake account and bring it really close to your data. Because from those containers, you can open up ports, can make sure that those containers are actually talking to each other, and you can, of course, also access data from these containers. And to make the picture complete, you can actually query data using a container, interpret it with a large language model, and give that response back through Streamlit and expose that to users. So this is really preferred if A, you want to create a really complex use case, but also B, if you want to bring the model close to your data. So I would say when it comes to getting started quickly, you rather stay on this side of the slide, where you only look at serving a Streamlit application and an external large language model. And the more your use case actually evolves, and if you have certain requirements to bring the model close to your data, then you actually move more over to that side when it comes to your architecture. And the last thing I haven't mentioned yet are external functions. You can use external functions also to call external large language models. And the power of this approach is that you can now actually also call an OpenAI model by using SQL. And that's really a comprehensive overview of how you can get started with GenAI use cases on Snowflake today. So now we are ready for a bit of live demoing, where I really want to show you one of the use cases I had outlined before, which we call the Analytics Assistant. And the Analytics Assistant is really a productivity booster, because with that assistant in mind, you can actually query your data without the knowledge of SQL, and that analyst would actually translate your query into SQL, query the data for you, and even put it into format, which is really nice and also allows a chat interface. So with further ado, I would really like to jump into a demo right now. Here you can see the user interface, for example, implemented in Streamlit, where a few instructions on one side, and also most importantly, an outline of all the tables which I have currently access to in my Snowflake schema. Within Snowflake, I might have a table which includes customer data, orders data, and even more. And now with the power of this Analytics Assistant, I can actually run a query such as, what are my customers who live in a certain city, in this case, a Nordics city. So I'm going to send that request. And this request is actually routed to a large language model right now, which will then also talk to the data by actually executing the generated SQL query. And as you can see, we have 3 customers living right now in that city. And if you're interested in what happened in the background, We can also check out the SQL query, which was created by using a large language model. And this one, to no surprise, is a simple select statement, which filters all my customers who live in that certain city. So let's maybe look into a use case, which is a bit more elaborate, by actually asking to group all my customers by city and then showing the top 10 cities. So let me send that request. And now we can see that for each of the cities, we do have the number of customers which are, for example, living in Stockholm. And with that in mind, of course, you can show again the SQL query which was created for that, but you could also create, let's say, a graph which visualizes those results. And this really shows you how easy it is to now start talking to your data, and that without expert knowledge. And all of this works by connecting your large language model to your Snowflake account and all the data within. So you might wonder, how does that use case actually work under the hood? Well, let me shortly walk you through that. Working back from the user again, the user is clicking a button on the user interface and also supplies a question in a natural language format. This question is actually then passed to our backend service. And in this case, we have used the common stack of using Docker, Python, Fast API, and we have also used LangChain, which has established itself as really the open source tool for creating large language model chains. And those chains are able to communicate with your models, getting responses, and doing that in a really, really nicely manageable manner. And with that request, what we're actually doing is we are wrapping the question of the user into a so-called prompt. And as I said before, there are different ways of how you can tweak your models. One of them is through prompt engineering. And what we have essentially done in this demo is we've taken a prompt which puts the model into the persona of an analytics assistant. And in our case, we call it the SQL expert. And the SQL expert is now fed with context about our tables and the question which the user was actually asking for. And this request is sent to the large language model, which replies with two things. The first one is the query. So this is the generated SQL query, which you can run against your Snowflake data, but then also the result, which was actually executed against your Snowflake data. And then the last step is really just using our backend service to wrap this response in a manner so that the user interface can display that easily again for the user. And this is how you can actually create an analytics assistant on your own using Snowflake. So to close with a few key takeaways, I would just like to highlight that you can start upskilling today and also deploy today. And if I were to recommend a resource to get started with today, it's really this generative AI and large language model school, which is offered by Snowflake, which is a nice combination of theoretical content, similar to what I've covered today initially in the presentation, with lots of practical exercises. Once you have gone through that school, I can also recommend you to getting started with Streamlit, because as I said, if you're comfortable with Python, it's really the go-to tool to start with your POC use cases on GenAI. And once you're comfortable with creating your first GenAI POCs, I would really recommend you to upskill in Docker and then also start to apply for container services, because this is currently in private preview. And then the last thing just to highlight is share your app. There's the native apps framework in Snowflake, which you can leverage to share your app within your organization, but also with other teams, and all of this with the role-based access, which already exists in Snowflake. And then as a last thought, we're here to help. We have quite a few AI and ML packages which we can offer. And then also on the GenAI side of things, I would like to highlight two ways of how we can get started with. The first one is a free 2-hour Art of the Possible workshop, where we're going to show you the possibilities of how you can leverage Snowflake for your GenAI use case. And then also one package I would like to highlight is really on the implementation side of things, which is GenAI in a week. With the power of Streamlit and externally hosted models, we can implement a common GenAI use case within a week with you before going actually into more elaborate proof of concepts and productionalization of GenAI use cases. So this was it for today. Thank you so much for listening, and please get in touch with us if you would like to see how you can use GenAI on Snowflake today. Thank you.